Hello and welcome to Space Code Foundation's interview series for women of color in space. I'm Nivedita Raju, Director of Legal Affairs and Research at Space Code. Space Code Foundation is committed to ensuring that outer space benefits all of humankind. And so each episode of our series features a different speaker, a woman of color, describing her experiences in the international space sector. This episode, we're delighted to invite Sahba El-Shawa, a Palestinian engineer, to share her story with us. Welcome, Sahba. Could you please tell us a little about your background and what led you to work in the space sector?
My journey to the space sector has taken a very long time, over a decade really, to eventually get to where I am now. But it started very early on. I was always very interested in how things work in general, super curious about the world. And when I was graduating high school in 2010, my biggest interests were the human mind and space and the universe. So how do we work? And also, how does the universe work? And unfortunately, at the time, I didn't really have the opportunity to go into the space field directly. So neither in Saudi Arabia nor in Jordan, where I ended up going to university initially. And I went into engineering because I also loved science and math. And both of my parents were also engineers, so that definitely influenced me a lot, but luckily I love it. So I ended up going into mechatronics engineering because I didn't have the option to study space engineering. And while I was at the German Jordanian University in Jordan, I went there for 3 years. And in 2011, I applied for a scholarship with the German Academic Exchange Service. And I remember telling them in my interview, I really want to work with the German Aerospace Center, DLR, someday. And I thought that would take, forever to reach that, but it was kind of a long-term goal. And to me, having these long-term goals in mind of I want to eventually get into the space industry allowed me to kind of just be open to what options I had in front of me. So fast forward a few years, I immigrated to Canada. I ended up at the University of British Columbia in Vancouver, and I lost 3 years of transfer credits in this move. So initially I was very, disappointed by that. But being there actually allowed me to start getting involved in space projects through student engineering teams. So I joined UBC Orbit, which worked on a CubeSat, and later UBC Rocket, working on a suborbital rocket. And believe it or not, in my last year at UBC, a robotics lab that I wanted to work with had just started a partnership with DLR. And so to me, that felt like it was meant to be. And luckily, I got to work on the first 2 projects with DLR. One of them being a research project, and the other was my capstone or graduation project. Unfortunately, even after I graduated, I still was not able to work in the space industry. At the time, I had been in Canada for 4 years, and there were some security restrictions for the job I wanted regarding how long I had been in Canada to be able to get into to work on space R&D. And so I ended up working at Intel for 2 years in Vancouver. It was a great job, a great company, but I still felt that I needed to find my way to space. And so in 2019, I left to go to the International Space University in France. So that's where I did my master's in space studies. Through that master's, I got to learn more about space through from engineering and science, human performance in space, and space law and policy, which I was also very interested in. And then I got to do my internship at the European Space Agency, which was also, it was a dream come true, but at the same time, it was during COVID. So it was a bit of an interesting situation. But during my internship, I worked with the Clean Space Initiative on the environmental impacts of space activities, and that really opened my eyes to a lot of things in the industry. And now I am working as a system AIT engineer, so assembly, integration, and testing at a small sat company here in the Netherlands.
My goodness, that is a long, long list of achievements, I have to say that. And you worked on so many projects as well. You have so much work experience. Could you talk a little bit more about your analogs project and how it would benefit Jordan?
Yeah, for sure. So other than the work that I'm doing in my actual job, there's a few different volunteer initiatives that I work with. So the one you mentioned, which I founded last year, is the Jordan Space Research Initiative. This was a culmination of several other projects that led to this stage. So while I was doing my master's at ISU, I did my individual project on Jordan and the United Nations Space 2030 agenda. So trying to create a roadmap for space and sustainable development, because for countries like Jordan that don't have a space agency or a space program, the general public is not as well informed regarding the benefits of space, and we don't have an abundance of natural or financial resources. So then, of course, it's not seen as a priority. It's not seen as something that could benefit Jordan. And so I wanted to try and change that narrative by looking at what Jordan's national priorities were in terms of the sustainable development goals, or even the strengths that we have, the industry, and so on, and how we can translate that to space. So that was the beginning of coming up with this preliminary roadmap, tying in the sustainable development with space. At the same time, I was the national point of contact for Jordan in the Space Generation Advisory Council. And the regional coordinator told me about this new program in the Moon Village Association called PESC, Participation of Emerging Space Countries. So I applied on behalf of Jordan, and I had to create a team, and we created a roadmap for Jordan to get involved in the Moon Village and lunar exploration over the next 20 years. And that was also largely based on the work that I did during my project, tying it to sustainable development. From there, we decided to actually find a way to implement these things. The Jordan Space Research Initiative came about because we wanted to be able to have to establish an analog research facility in Jordan in the desert. I'm sure you've seen it in space movies, and it looks a lot like Mars. So other than the aesthetics, it can also help us with our research, right? So that was one of the main technical goals, and looking at different research areas like water resource management or women's health, and things that could be beneficial to Jordan as well, which Jordan has a really large refugee population, people living in remote areas with limited resources. So in a way, the technologies and the research that we do to help the Moon Village are the same things that we need on Earth as well. And then on the other hand, there's the outreach and education side of it. So actually sharing what space could mean to Jordan, why it's important, and also providing opportunities to people in Jordan. Now they have an internship program and a way to get involved in the space industry, but we're trying to get kind of the general public up to speed on why it's important to do these things.
You've articulated the interconnectedness of space with daily benefits so well, especially for countries like Jordan that have these issues. Amazing work. And thank you for describing that for our viewers. So in addition to all of these projects and your current job, you also work on space ethics and human rights. As a Palestinian woman, what has been challenging professionally working in this area?
Being a Palestinian in the space industry has been an interesting journey, to say the least. When I was first getting into space, or trying to, I actually avoided saying that I was Palestinian, because it's something that's seen as an inherently political statement. And space being the very political industry that it is, I was afraid that, being open about this would hinder my opportunities and my career, and I wouldn't be able to actually get into the space industry. And so I can tell you about two situations that I experienced kind of before and after I became more vocal about it. When I was first starting at ISU, we had an opening ceremony where you go up and introduce yourself. And I, until the very last moment, remember how torn I was if I should say it or not. Meanwhile, of course, my Israeli colleagues were completely open about it, waving their flag very proudly. And I was going through this internal conflict of, do I say it, or will it hurt my, my studies, my career? I know a lot of people in this room right now probably won't understand. And so unfortunately I didn't at the time. And I do regret that, but I think it shows just how stifled we feel, that we can't even open up and you know, I am proud to be a Palestinian, but at the same time, I was scared to say it. Fast forward, while I was working at ISA doing my internship there, that was after I became a lot more vocal about being Palestinian. I think the more I learned about space and how political it was, the more I realized that actually I should be talking about these things, because a lot of people don't even have it on their radar, because it's so normalized, really. And so I remember I was talking to a few other interns at ISA who asked me where I was from. Naturally, I said, this time I actually said I'm Palestinian. And I remember it turned into this, you know, somewhat heated argument. And someone ended up telling me that basically it was so long ago, we should just get over it, or how if we were all actually European here, we wouldn't be disagreeing, which to me, I mean, it made me feel like, oh, you know, you don't belong here because you're Palestinian, because you're talking about these issues. So it really has been difficult, but I think getting involved with the Ethics and Human Rights Group in the SJAC, I joined last year after joining the Diversity Action Team, where I said I was Palestinian and I'm passionate about these issues. And then the co-lead of the Ethics and Human Rights Group invited me to join their group. And I loved it because for the first time in the space industry, I was talking to people who felt the same way about social justice issues, about climate, about all of these important things that we, you know, gloss over in the space industry a lot of the time. And so now I'm one of the co-leads of this group, and we're starting up 2 new projects. One focused on Indigenous rights and perspectives in space, and one on space militarization. And these are very broad topics. They affect a lot of communities around the world. But for me personally, it's also a chance to be able to talk about Palestine, to talk about the impact of, you know, the fact that the big space companies, Lockheed Martin, Boeing, all these big names are actually surviving off of manufacturing weapons that are being used to kill people, you know, not just in Palestine, but also in other countries around the world. And these things are very deeply rooted in colonialism and imperialism and exploiting the land. But we, you know, we carry on like it's okay. They can use space exploration to basically whitewash the war crimes that are happening. And I think it's a good way now, like through the Ethics and Human Rights Group, to raise awareness of these issues of things like, even when it comes to Earth observation, there's laws in place that keep US companies from sharing data, for example, of, you know, what is now called Israel, basically to hide what's happening there. And so when we don't talk about these issues, we're complicit in leaving all of these things unsaid and just continuing with the status quo. And so, yeah, it's been a long journey for me to get to the stage now where I actually, maybe I talk about these things too much, some would say, but I do feel now a lot more comfortable raising awareness when it comes to these issues, because I also realize that if I'm put in a situation where someone doesn't want to work with me because of this, then that is not someone I want to work with. And so I'm glad I've gotten here now, but I think there's still a lot of work that needs to be done in this area.
As a vocal advocate against the growing weaponization of outer space, you've talked about how space security is closely linked with the exclusion of minorities. Can you tell us how you've experienced this personally?
I think this is one of the biggest problems that we have in the space industry today, is that the defense and space is so tightly coupled. We are considered one industry. And while I understand that this is how space may have started, you know, through the Cold War and so on, I think we've we've evolved past that. We've reached a stage where we should be able to separate these things. Defense and military should be a customer of the space industry like any other application. But when they are so closely tied, that actually leads to a lot of restrictions on who can join the space industry, what kind of jobs they can have. As I mentioned earlier, I experienced this with the company in Canada that I wanted to work for. But at the same time, it's also when you're searching for jobs, and on LinkedIn, you can even filter by industry. So that's defense and space. And you will get things like weapons specialist and warfare expert, when I just want to work on space exploration. I want to work on, applications that actually help people and not contribute to this intense militarization of the space industry. So also knowing that my work may be used for these purposes is it's personally very discouraging. I think it leads a lot of people to not want to even get into the space industry. This is something I'm struggling with right now as well, having finally gotten into the space industry, but knowing that the work that we do is so closely linked to how my people are being oppressed, and things that I cannot, you can't really fix it in a day. Like, these are systemic issues. And as long as we continue like this, nothing is going to change. So I really think we need to decouple space and defense. And I know this will take a long time, but I think even just being able to talk about it and like in platforms like this, and to raise awareness and to get people to start thinking, even though we understand why the space industry is so tightly coupled with the military because of the way it started out, I think being able to really try and understand how this is now impacting people, how it is impacting the environment. As I mentioned, the military industrial complex, one of the biggest polluters, and also, causing people to get displaced from their countries and so on. So I think that is also a huge factor that, to people like me who come from a background where I'm a pacifist, I'm very anti-militarization. And that's, of course, due to my own biases. I'm not going to think the same way as someone who, served in the military. But at the same time, I think we need to be able to have these conversations if we are ever going to reach that stage where we can decouple them. And a lot of when I talk to people about this, the biggest thing is, well, that's where the money comes from, right? The money that goes into the space industry is coming from military. And so we can never separate them. I disagree, because the military is getting money from the government, right? So governments choose to prioritize this over people, education, healthcare, climate action. And I do believe that we as the people have the power to change that. We just need to kind of shift this mentality and to be more vocal about it, and not be scared to, oh, I'm not gonna get into the space industry if I say I'm Palestinian. I'm not gonna be able to work if I say I'm anti-military. And I actually, during my interview for my current job, told my now manager, I will not work on any military projects. That is not something that I'm willing to do. And that is a risk that I took, because I may not have gotten hired because of it. But at the same time, as I said earlier, once you realize what's really important to you, it's a lot easier to be like, well, if that doesn't work out, then it's not for me, because the things that I care about will always take precedence over that.
The underlying politics in this space also limits our ability to achieve sustainability in outer space. How can we incorporate a stronger sustainability focus in space exploration?
So when it comes to sustainability in space, a lot of the conversation revolves around space debris, which is a really big issue, but it's not the only issue, right? So with sustainability, I think what a lot of people tend to kind of lose in the conversation is the fact that everything is connected. All of these things are interrelated. The reason that we have, the space debris problems, the same reason we have the climate change problem on Earth. It's the way that we approach nature, the way that we really, the respect that we have for the environment, the way that we view ourselves and our connection to the environment. And it's difficult because, of course, we're coming at it from very different ideologies. We all have our own biases, the way that we view the world, the way that we view ourselves. But unfortunately, what ends up happening is we overlook all of these impacts, especially looking at, the countries in power, especially in the space industry. When you talk about the US and Russia and China and India, you also see this, the narrative that's being pushed a lot of the time, the countries that are singled out when we talk about sustainability it's extremely biased. Like everyone, there was such a fuss about the Chinese rocket that was coming back to Earth. The way that the media was kind of addressing how China's approach to sustainability or the Chinese rocket coming back to Earth versus, for example, the Israeli lunar lander that crash landed on the moon with biological material on board. And that was something that was not even disclosed to the international community and something that was being brushed over as, this is okay, or this was done last minute, or we didn't actually know about this, which I find incredibly hard to believe because, when you launch things into space, it's a long process, approvals required. You can't just do something last minute. So I think really what we're lacking is kind of a collective approach to sustainability, where we're looking at not just what are the impacts in space, but also how are our relationships or geopolitical relationships here on Earth actually impacting the way that we approach sustainability. Like if you even thinking about space debris, the US is one of the largest contributors to the debris problem. And we're just too, I think, wrapped up in this. Understandably, space is a political field. And that is something that I personally didn't even really think about before getting into the space industry, because to me, it was about exploration and scientific advancement and all of these kind of naive ideas of, what space is. So like we have an International Space Station, we all work together. It's about, finding out more about the universe. But unfortunately, it's, and as I was saying earlier, it's very tied in with what is called defense, but really the military industrial complex, which also causes a lot of environmental harm here on Earth. And now we're carrying these same mentalities and the same approach up to space. So I think it's a difficult topic to tackle, but so long as we're just focusing on one part of the issue or specific actors because of, geopolitical interests, we are not going to change anything, because we need to be able to see the interconnectedness of what is happening to our environment on Earth, to our environment in space, the way that we're approaching, for example, lunar mining and exploitation of the moon. These are things that we shouldn't wait until we reach a stage that is so beyond that we can't come back from. We need to be more proactive when we're thinking about sustainability and what that means for everyone, for all of humankind.
A frequent issue that we encounter when we're working to improve representation of minorities in the space sector is tokenism. You had mentioned to me that the framing of diversity, equity, and inclusion itself needs to change. Could you please share any advice you have for organizations in the space sector who work on these issues?
I think when it comes to diversity and inclusion, there's the numbers issue, and then there's the culture issue. So organizations tend to focus on the numbers. We need to hire more women to reach this baseline. We need to hire more minorities for whatever to basically enhance the image of the company. But what that fails to address is the culture issue, which is what are the systemic reasons keeping these people out of the industry or your specific company? And at the same time, even when they end up joining, what's causing them to leave? I don't know if you've heard of the leaky pipeline in STEM fields. So basically women go into engineering or science, technology, they a lot of the time end up leaving. It's not because we don't want to be there. It's because of the way that we feel when we're in these fields, the way that we're often excluded. Even when you bring up issues that you've faced in the industry, they're often brushed aside or not addressed. People seem to think that, we're so much better now because we have women working as engineers, or we have women on the board. And what's really lacking there, and this is really a great example of tokenism, but also complete lack of intersectionality. We look at just, we're going to hire more women. We're not going to look at all the other issues that people face. And I've personally experienced this in every single job, every school that I've been to. Oftentimes, you're not taken seriously until you're backed up by the people already in power. And the unfortunate thing is then that a lot of people don't speak out about situations that make them uncomfortable because they realize that either nothing will change or actually it's going to harm me. And especially for early career professionals, we're put in situations where if I actually speak out about something that happened, it's going to reflect negatively on me, or it's not going to be taken seriously. And, time after time, that it just adds up, and it's natural that people would end up leaving. And so really my advice would be to focus on shifting the culture and to be more intersectional, and not just to to address the diversity problem, we need to hire more women. Or, if I'm making a brochure for my company, I'm going to feature the only person of color in the entire company to sell the idea that we're diverse. Or I'm going to, have this diversity and inclusion role, but really they're not going to be able to enact any changes on the way we do things. So I think we need to start thinking of it more as this culture shift than we just need to address the numbers.
Thank you, Sahba, for that deeply personal and insightful interview. And we are honored to be sharing your story. Space Code Foundation will be announcing details for its next episode soon. Please like this video, subscribe to our channel, and follow us on social media for updates.